The question that followed me. Have you ever loved someone and still had to let them go, not because you stopped loving them, but because life quietly decided for you? That question followed me for years. It followed me across oceans, through airports, seasons, jobs, and long American highways where the sky feels bigger than your courage. It followed me while I was trying to learn English, trying to survive, trying to belong. And sometimes, late at night, it followed me even when I pretended everything was fine. If you are watching this video, maybe you know this feeling too. Maybe you sit down to practice English listening or speaking, and suddenly your mind drifts. Not because you are lazy. Not because you are weak. But because learning a language often opens doors to memories you were not ready to revisit. Love. Loss. Hope. Letting go. When I first arrived in the United States, I thought English would be my biggest challenge. I was wrong. English was only the surface. Underneath it was fear, the fear of not being understood, the fear of being misunderstood. And the deeper fear that even if I learned the language perfectly, some people would still never stay. I came to America with one suitcase and many expectations. I believed that if I worked hard enough, spoke clearly enough, loved deeply enough, everything would eventually make sense. That is a very human belief. It is also a very dangerous one. Because life does not always reward effort in the way we expect. In the beginning, my English sounded careful, slow, almost fragile. Simple sentences. Short words. Hello. How are you? I'm fine, thank you. They were correct, but they were empty. They did not carry who I was. They did not carry my past, my culture, my weather, my way of loving. And yet, those small sentences were my lifeline. There is something strange about learning English in America. You are surrounded by the language every second, but you still feel alone inside it. People speak fast. Smiles are polite. Conversations end quickly. And your brain, trying to protect you, starts whispering dangerous thoughts. Maybe you are not enough. Maybe you will never belong. Psychology calls this cognitive overload. When your brain processes a new language, a new culture, and emotional uncertainty at the same time, it goes into survival mode. That is why many people lose motivation to practice English, not because they cannot learn, but because learning becomes emotionally expensive. I did not know that back then. All I knew was that some nights, after work, I sat in my small room and practiced listening to English stories, just to hear a voice that stayed. Stories did not interrupt me. Stories did not judge my accent. Stories waited for me to understand. And then, in the middle of this quiet survival, love appeared. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just, naturally. A conversation at work. A shared joke. A simple question in English that did not feel heavy. How was your day? For the first time, English was not something I studied. English was something I lived. That is the thing nobody tells you about language learning. When emotions enter the picture, everything changes. Your listening improves because you care. Your speaking flows because you want to be understood. Your mistakes stop feeling like failures and start feeling like steps closer to connection. But here is the truth most people avoid. Love does not guarantee staying. Especially in a country like the United States, where work, policies, timing, and personal goals pull people in different directions. You can love someone deeply and still reach a moment where the question appears, quietly but firmly, can you love and let go? This question does not only apply to relationships. It applies to dreams, versions of yourself, even the way you thought your life in America would look. Letting go is not weakness. Neuroscience shows that the brain resists endings because endings feel like loss of control. But learning, real learning, requires letting go of who you were to make space for who you are becoming. When you practice English through stories like this, something important happens. Your brain relaxes. Your nervous system feels safe. You are not memorizing vocabulary. You are walking through a human experience. That is why storytelling is one of the most effective ways to reach B1, B2, even C1 and C2 levels, not because it is easy, but because it is real. As you listen to my story, you are not just practicing English. You are training your brain to stay present with discomfort, with emotion, with uncertainty. And that is a skill far more valuable than perfect grammar. I did not know yet how my love story would end. I did not know who would stay and who would leave. All I knew was that America was teaching me something slowly, patiently, through language and silence. You can love fully and still let go gently. And maybe that is not a tragedy. Maybe that is growth. So if you are tired, if you feel stuck with your English, if you feel like giving up, not only on language, but on a version of life you once believed in, stay with me. This story is not about perfection. It is about becoming someone who can love, learn, and move forward, even when the answer is not clear yet. Landing in America alone. The plane landed quietly, but something inside me did not. When you arrive in the United States alone, there is a strange moment when everything looks exactly like the movies, and yet nothing feels familiar. The airport is bright. People walk fast. Voices overlap in confident English. And you stand there, holding your bag, realizing that this is not a trip. This is your life now. I remember thinking, so this is America. Not big dreams. Not success. Not love. Just me, breathing carefully, trying not to look lost. The first lesson America taught me was not about language. It was about independence. No one checks if you ate. No one asks if you slept well. No one slows down because you are tired or confused. In this country, freedom is generous, but it expects you to carry your own weight. My English, at that time, lived only in my head. Grammar rules were clear. Vocabulary lists were familiar. But real conversations? They felt like running on ice. People spoke fast, casually, skipping words. My brain worked overtime just to catch the meaning. By the time I understood the question, the moment had already passed. This is where many English learners quietly give up. Not because English is too hard, but because the loneliness becomes heavier than the motivation. Studies in cognitive psychology show that social isolation reduces working memory capacity. In simple terms, when you feel alone, your brain learns slower. That is not a personal failure. That is biology. But back then, I blamed myself. I thought, if I were smarter, I would speak better. If I spoke better, life would be easier. It is a very American belief: fix yourself, and everything else will follow. The climate did not help either. I arrived during a season that felt wrong. The sky was wide and pale. The air was dry. In my home country, weather had rhythm: warm rain, familiar heat, predictable cycles. In America, the climate felt emotional in its own way. Some days were bright but cold. Some days were sunny yet lonely. It mirrored exactly how I felt inside. I started working almost immediately. Long hours. New systems. New rules. English everywhere. Meetings. Instructions. Small talk in the break room that I half understood. I smiled a lot. Smiling became my survival skill. When words fail, the face tries to compensate. At night, exhaustion came fast. But sleep did not. My brain replayed conversations, correcting sentences I should have said. I should have said I'm used to it, not I used to it. That kind of thinking is common among language learners. It is called post-event rumination. Your brain replays social moments to avoid future mistakes. Helpful at first. Harmful when it steals your rest. That was when English stopped being a goal and became a companion. I listened to slow English stories, not to study, but to feel less alone. A calm voice speaking clearly, patiently, without rushing me. I did not realize it then, but this was immersive learning at its best: low pressure, emotionally safe, deeply effective. And slowly, something shifted. I stopped asking, how fast can I learn English? I started asking, how can English support my life? Living and working in the U.S. teaches you that language is not about sounding perfect. It is about being understood enough to move forward. You do not need advanced vocabulary to survive your first year. You need clarity. You need courage. You need the ability to say simple things honestly. I don't understand. Can you say that again, slowly? I'm still learning. Those sentences saved me. And yet, even as my English improved, the loneliness remained. Because language can open doors, but it cannot promise that people will stay. Friendships in America often feel temporary. Jobs change. Cities change. Lives move fast. You can share moments deeply and still walk separate paths. This is where my story begins to intertwine with love. Not yet. Not fully. But the ground was being prepared. I was becoming someone who could listen, not only to English, but to silence. Someone who could sit with uncertainty without running away. When you learn English through stories like this, you are doing more than training your ears. You are practicing patience. You are allowing meaning to arrive slowly. That skill will matter later, especially when emotions enter the picture. Because love, like language, cannot be rushed. And America, in its quiet way, was teaching me that too. By the end of my first year, I was still alone. Still learning. Still unsure. But I was stronger than the person who landed at that airport. My English was not fluent, but it was alive. And my heart, though tired, was still open. I did not know it yet, but soon, someone would walk into my life. Someone who would change the way I used English. Someone who would make me ask the question that still echoes today, can you love and let go? Work, weather, and silence. If you want to understand America, don't start with politics or movies. Start with work. Because in this country, work is not just something you do. It is something you become. My days quickly fell into a pattern. Wake up early. Check the weather. Drive or commute in silence. Work. Smile. Listen carefully. Speak carefully. Come home tired. Repeat. At first, I told myself this was temporary. Just a phase. Just survival mode. But phases, if you're not careful, turn into years. The weather became part of my emotional calendar. Cold mornings made English harder. My mouth felt stiff. Words came out slower. On bright sunny days, I felt hopeful for no logical reason at all. Neuroscience explains this well. Sunlight affects serotonin levels, which directly influence motivation and learning. I did not know the science then. I just knew that on gray days, everything, including English, felt heavier. At work, English was everywhere, but it was never gentle. Instructions were fast. Feedback was indirect. Humor was dry. Small talk felt like a performance where I never knew my lines. People asked, "How's it going?" and kept walking. At first, I answered honestly. Later, I learned the American version of the truth. Good. You. This is an important moment for English learners. You realize that language is cultural. Words mean different things depending on context. Good does not always mean good. Let's do lunch does not always mean lunch. Understanding this is not about vocabulary. It is about observation. Silence followed me everywhere. In my car. In my apartment. Even in crowded places. Silence is loud when you are far from home. And silence has a way of making your thoughts echo. That is when doubts start growing. Why am I here? Is this worth it? Am I falling behind? Psychologists call this existential fatigue, the exhaustion that comes not from doing too much, but from not feeling connected to meaning. Many immigrants experience it. Many English learners experience it too. You are functioning, but you are not fully alive. I noticed something interesting about my English during this time. My listening improved faster than my speaking. That is normal. The brain prioritizes comprehension before production. But emotionally, it felt unbalanced. I could understand conversations about life, love, and plans, but I could not always participate fully. I was present, but slightly outside the circle. That distance shapes you. You become a good observer. You notice details others miss. Tone. Body language. Pauses. This is where storytelling skills quietly develop. When you cannot speak much, you listen deeply. Some nights, after work, I practiced English by replaying the day in my head. I imagined different responses. Clearer sentences. Braver words. This mental rehearsal is actually a powerful learning technique used by athletes and performers. The brain does not fully distinguish between real practice and imagined practice. Both strengthen neural pathways. But there was a downside. The more I lived inside my head, the quieter my real life became. I did not go out much. I did not share much. I told myself I was focusing. In reality, I was protecting myself from disappointment. America respects privacy. It does not push. It does not ask twice. If you stay silent, the world keeps moving without you. This is freedom, but it can also be isolating if you are not ready. That was when I realized something important. English was not the problem. Silence was. Silence does not mean peace. Sometimes it means avoidance. Avoiding mistakes. Avoiding rejection. Avoiding the risk of being seen. And learning a language, especially English in America, forces you to confront all three. I started making small changes. Very small. One sentence at a time. One interaction at a time. Can you repeat that, please? I'm still learning, but I want to try. I don't know the word yet. These sentences are simple, but they are brave. They invite connection instead of perfection. Research in social psychology shows that vulnerability increases trust. When you admit you are learning, people slow down. Not everyone, but enough. And slowly, silence loosened its grip. Not disappeared. Just softened. The weather changed again. Seasons passed. My English became more natural, not fluent, but flexible. I could express opinions. I could tell short stories. I could joke, sometimes. And somewhere between work schedules and climate shifts, my life opened just enough for something new to enter. I did not know it yet, but I was about to meet someone. Not because I was ready. Not because my English was perfect. But because I had learned how to listen, to words, to silence, and to myself. And that made all the difference. When English was not enough. There was a moment when I realized something uncomfortable. My English was getting better, but my life did not feel lighter. I could understand meetings. I could follow instructions. I could survive small talk without panic. On paper, I was improving. If you looked at my progress like a language teacher, you would say, "Good job. Keep going." But inside, something was missing. English was working, but only on the surface. This is the stage many learners reach and quietly get confused by. You expect that once your English improves, confidence will follow automatically. Motivation will return. life will open up. But instead, you feel strangely flat. Not unhappy. Just muted. Psychology has a name for this too, emotional dissonance. Your external performance improves, but your internal experience does not match it. And when that happens, your brain starts asking dangerous questions. What's the point? Why am I still tired? Why do I still feel alone if I can communicate now? I noticed it most clearly in conversations that mattered. At work, I could explain tasks. At the store, I could ask for help. But when it came to feelings, fear, longing, confusion, English suddenly felt too small. There are emotions that live between words. In your native language, you can touch them easily. In a second language, they hide. You know what you want to say, but the sentence arrives thin, stripped of nuance. You say, I'm okay, when what you mean is, I'm holding myself together. That gap is painful. Neuroscience explains why. Emotional expression is deeply connected to early language acquisition. Your first language is wired into the limbic system, where feelings live. A second language often stays in the analytical part of the brain longer. That is why swearing, loving, and grieving feel different in English, even if you speak it well. I started noticing how often Americans used simple emotional language. I'm good. I'm fine. It's okay. At first, I thought they were hiding something. Later, I realized something more subtle. They were managing emotions efficiently. In a fast-moving society, feelings are compressed to stay functional. That works, until you are the one carrying too much inside. There were evenings when I sat alone, fluent enough to talk, but not fluent enough to be seen. That is a very specific loneliness. It is not the loneliness of silence. It is the loneliness of partial expression. This was when learning English through stories became more than a method. It became a refuge. Stories allowed me to borrow emotional structures. I could hear how people expressed regret, hope, love, letting go. Slowly, clearly, without pressure. My brain was not just learning vocabulary. It was learning emotional patterns in English. And something surprising happened. When I listened to emotional stories in simple English, my own feelings became clearer, even before I could name them out loud. Research shows that narrative listening activates both language and emotional processing areas simultaneously. In simple terms, stories help you feel and understand at the same time. But there was still a limit. English helped me function. It helped me grow. But it could not answer the deeper question forming inside me. Is this life enough if I cannot share it fully with someone? That question did not come from weakness. It came from awareness. When survival mode ends, meaning becomes the next need. And meaning, for many of us, is relational. I began to crave conversations that were not efficient. Conversations that took time. Conversations where silence was allowed. In America, those are rare. Not impossible, but rare. People schedule emotions the way they schedule meetings. I remember one night thinking, I can live here. I can work here. I can speak English here. But can I love here? That question scared me more than any grammar test ever did. It forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Language alone does not create connection. Presence does. Vulnerability does. Timing does. And those things are not guaranteed, no matter how fluent you are. Still, this realization was not a dead end. It was a turning point. Because once you accept that English will not solve everything, you stop demanding miracles from it. You start using it as a bridge instead of a destination. You allow yourself to be imperfect, emotional, human. I began to speak more honestly, even if my sentences were simple. I'm not sure. This is hard for me. I'm trying to understand. Those sentences changed my interactions. Not dramatically. Quietly. People leaned in more. Conversations slowed down. And slowly, the space where love could enter began to form. I did not know who it would be. I did not know how it would happen. But I knew one thing clearly now. English was no longer enough by itself. And that meant I was ready for something more. Meeting someone unexpected. People like to believe that love arrives with signals. A perfect moment. A clear sign. A feeling you immediately recognize. But that is not how it happened for me. Love arrived quietly, almost accidentally, on a day that looked exactly like every other day in America. Same routine. Same work clothes. Same tired thoughts in my head. If you had asked me that morning whether something important was about to happen, I would have said no, without hesitation. We met in a place that did not feel romantic at all. No music. No soft lighting. Just a normal environment where people pass each other without really seeing. And maybe that was why it worked. There was no pressure to impress. No expectation to perform. The first conversation was simple. Too simple to be memorable, you might think. Hi. Hi. How's your day? Busy. Yours? But something about the pace felt different. The English was slow. Natural. Not rushed. I did not feel the usual tension in my chest. I did not rehearse sentences in my head. I just responded. That is how you know something matters. Your body relaxes before your mind understands why. Psychologists call this emotional safety. When your nervous system does not feel threatened, cognitive load drops. You listen better. You speak more freely. This is why some people make your English sound better than it actually is. They are not correcting your grammar. They are calming your brain. We talked again later. And again after that. Nothing dramatic. Just small exchanges that slowly became familiar. I noticed that I looked forward to them, not because they were exciting, but because they were easy. In a country where everything moves fast, ease is rare. And rare things matter. What surprised me most was not attraction. It was curiosity. We asked questions that went beyond small talk, but never too deep too fast. Where are you from? What do you miss? What do you like about being here? These are simple questions, but for immigrants, they carry weight. When I answered, my English was still imperfect. I searched for words. I paused. Sometimes I laughed at my own sentences. And instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt accepted. That was new. I realized something important during those early conversations. Love does not begin with big emotions. It begins with attention. Someone listening, not to respond, but to understand. My English did not suddenly improve. But my willingness to use it did. I spoke more. I explained more. I told small stories about my home country, the climate, the way seasons felt different, the way people connected differently. English became a bridge instead of a barrier. There is research showing that emotional engagement accelerates language acquisition. When you care about the outcome of a conversation, your brain releases dopamine, which strengthens memory formation. In simple terms, caring helps you learn faster. But there was more happening than learning. For the first time since arriving in America, I felt seen as a whole person, not just an employee, not just an immigrant. Not just someone still learning English. That feeling is powerful. It can make you forget how fragile things actually are. We started spending more time together. Still casually. Still undefined. America is very good at undefined relationships. You can be close without labeling anything. That freedom feels comfortable at first. We talked about work. About stress. About the strange pressure to always be productive here. About how time feels different in the U.S., measured in achievements instead of moments. Sometimes we spoke in English that was simple and slow. Sometimes we sat in silence. And the silence did not feel heavy. That mattered more than words. I noticed how my listening changed. I listened for meaning, not translation. I stopped turning sentences into my native language. I let English exist on its own. That is a major shift in language learning. It means your brain is beginning to think in English, not just decode it. But alongside that progress, something else grew, quietly. Expectation. Not unrealistic expectation. Just the hope that maybe, this time, connection would last. That maybe life in America did not have to be so temporary. I tried not to think too far ahead. Immigrants learn quickly not to plan emotionally. Too many things can change. Jobs. Visas. Priorities. Distance. Still, hope has a way of slipping in when you are not watching. Looking back, I can see the warning signs. Not red flags, just realities. We came from different backgrounds. Different timelines. Different ideas of stability. Love does not erase those differences. It only makes you aware of them. But at that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was this: English no longer felt lonely. And that was enough to make me believe that maybe, just maybe, this story would be different. Love grew between languages. Love does not arrive all at once. It grows in the spaces between words. At some point, I stopped noticing when we switched from polite conversations to real ones. There was no clear line. One day, we were just talking about work. The next, we were talking about fear. Not dramatically. Not emotionally loud. Just honestly. English changed during that time. It softened. I no longer chose words carefully like they were fragile objects. I let sentences come out imperfect, sometimes unfinished. And something surprising happened, meaning still landed. Maybe not perfectly, but enough. That is one of the most important lessons for advanced English learners. Clarity is more powerful than accuracy. You do not need complex grammar to express real emotion. You need presence. We spoke English differently depending on the moment. Sometimes it was light jokes, daily complaints, simple observations about the weather, about how strange American coffee tastes if you grew up somewhere else. Other times, it slowed down. I've never said this out loud before. I don't know how to explain it. Give me a second. Those sentences matter. They give your listener time. They give you time. In language learning, pauses are not mistakes. They are bridges. I noticed how my listening became more intentional. I was no longer listening just to understand words. I was listening for emotion, tone, hesitation. That is a C-level skill in any language, not because it is advanced, but because it is human. Neuroscience supports this. When emotional attachment is present, mirror neurons activate more strongly. Your brain begins to synchronize with the other person's rhythm. This improves pronunciation, intonation, and comprehension naturally. Love, quite literally, trains your ear. But love also reveals differences faster than anything else. We had different ways of handling stress. Different expectations about time, family, and commitment. In America, relationships often grow without urgency. People take their time. They value independence. For someone like me, coming from a culture where connection often means closeness, that difference was subtle but constant. English carried these differences quietly. Phrases like "I need space" or "let's see how it goes" sounded neutral, but they carried emotional weight. Understanding them required cultural fluency, not linguistic skill. At first, I misunderstood. I thought space meant distance. I thought flexibility meant uncertainty. This is where many bilingual relationships struggle. Not because of lack of love, but because of mismatched interpretations. The same sentence can mean safety to one person and instability to another. We talked about it. Slowly. Carefully. Sometimes awkwardly. Those conversations were not smooth, but they were real. And real conversations matter more than fluent ones. I became aware of how much emotional energy it takes to love in a second language. You are translating feelings in real time. You are choosing words that are strong enough but not overwhelming. You are constantly adjusting. That effort is invisible, but exhausting. Still, I kept going. Because the connection felt worth it. Because learning English through love felt alive. Because for the first time, my life in America felt shared. We spent time together doing ordinary things. Grocery shopping. Driving without music. Sitting quietly. These moments are powerful for language learners. They teach you rhythm, not vocabulary. They teach you how language lives in real life. I started thinking in English without realizing it. Not always. Not perfectly. But enough that my inner voice began to sound different. More direct. Less emotional, but clearer. And yet, underneath the growth, something else was forming. A quiet awareness. A sense that love was helping me expand, but not necessarily in the same direction as the other person. This is a hard realization to sit with. Because love teaches you how much you can give. But it also shows you where paths begin to separate. I did not want to see that yet. I told myself love needs time. And that is true. But love also needs alignment. And alignment cannot be forced by emotion alone. Still, in that season, we were happy enough. Present enough. Learning together in our own ways. English was no longer something I practiced alone at night. It was something I lived during the day. And for a while, that felt like enough. But life in America does not pause for feelings. And soon, reality would begin to press closer. Policies and pressure. America does not end relationships loudly. It does it with paperwork. At first, the pressure arrived quietly, disguised as normal adult responsibilities. Work schedules became tighter. Emails arrived with careful wording. Deadlines multiplied. Conversations slowly shifted from how we feel to what we need to do. That is how life changes shape, without asking permission. I remember the first time policy entered our relationship. Not as a threat. Just as a topic. Visas. Work authorization. Long-term plans. The kind of conversations that sound practical, reasonable, even mature. But underneath them lives fear. Fear of instability. Fear of dependency. Fear of choosing wrong in a country where mistakes are expensive. In America, systems matter. Rules matter. Timelines matter. You can love someone deeply and still be forced to think in quarters, contracts, and expiration dates. That pressure changes people. English became more formal during that time. More careful. More precise. We spoke in complete sentences again. We explained ourselves clearly. We justified feelings with logic. Emotional language slowly turned into strategic language. That shift is subtle, but dangerous. When love becomes a project to manage, something fragile begins to crack. I felt it in my body before I understood it in my mind. Tight shoulders. Shallow breathing. A constant low-level alertness. My nervous system was no longer relaxed during conversations. I listened not for connection, but for signs of risk. Psychology calls this anticipatory stress. When your brain predicts future threats, it stays activated even in safe moments. This directly affects language processing. You hesitate more. You second-guess words. You lose fluency not because your English got worse, but because your mind is busy protecting you. Work did not slow down either. In America, productivity does not pause for emotional transitions. You show up. You perform. You adapt. And if you cannot, someone else will. I started working longer hours. So did the other person. We told ourselves it was temporary. That is another American phrase that sounds harmless but carries weight. Temporary things often become permanent if no one stops them. Conversations shortened. Not because we cared less, but because we were tired. When we did talk, we talked about plans. About options. About what makes sense. Sense is important. But love does not survive on logic alone. I noticed how English began to feel heavier again. Not because of difficulty, but because of responsibility. Every sentence felt like it needed to be right. No misunderstandings. No emotional messiness. Clarity over vulnerability. That is when I realized something painful. English had once helped us connect. Now it was helping us distance politely. We were both doing what adults are taught to do: manage expectations, reduce risk, stay realistic. But realism without tenderness turns cold quickly. I tried to slow things down. To return to earlier conversations. To talk about feelings again, not just futures. Sometimes it worked. Sometimes it didn't. Timing matters. And timing is not something you can negotiate with effort alone. Research on relationship stress shows that external pressures, financial, legal, professional, are among the strongest predictors of emotional withdrawal. Not because love disappears, but because the brain prioritizes survival over connection. In simple terms, when life feels unsafe, love feels like a luxury. That truth is uncomfortable. Especially when you are the one asking, why are we changing? I practiced English differently during this time. More listening. Less speaking. I returned to stories. Slow voices. Simple sentences. Not to escape, but to ground myself. Stories reminded me that complexity does not always require complexity in language. I learned to say difficult things simply. This is hard for me. I feel distance. I'm scared. Those sentences are not dramatic. But they are honest. And honesty is risky when outcomes are uncertain. We reached a point where love was still present, but strained. Not broken. Just stretched thin by systems that do not care about emotion. America offers opportunity generously, but it demands resilience in return. I could feel a question forming again, stronger than before. Not yet spoken. Not yet answered. Can love survive pressure? Can connection outlast policy? Can two people want each other and still choose different paths? I did not know the answer. But I knew something was coming. And deep down, I understood that learning English had prepared me for this moment, not by giving me perfect words, but by teaching me how to sit with uncertainty, how to listen, and how to speak even when my voice shakes. Because the hardest conversations are not about grammar. They are about truth. Why some people cannot stay. There is a moment in every difficult relationship when the question changes. It is no longer do we love each other? It becomes can we stay? That moment does not arrive suddenly. It grows quietly, hidden inside small misunderstandings, delayed replies, postponed plans. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that feels like a clear ending. Just a slow realization that love and direction are no longer moving at the same speed. I remember noticing it in ordinary situations. Conversations about the future felt careful. Not hopeful. Careful. We spoke in conditional sentences. If things work out. If the timing is right. If everything aligns. Too many ifs. In English, conditional sentences are useful. In life, they are warning signs. This is when I started to understand something painful but important. Not everyone who enters your life is meant to stay in it. And that truth has nothing to do with effort, loyalty, or depth of feeling. It has everything to do with alignment. Alignment is invisible at first. You only notice it when it is missing. In America, staying means more than emotional commitment. It means logistical commitment, legal commitment, financial planning, lifestyle compatibility. Love has to coexist with systems, and systems are not flexible. I began to see how differently we defined stability. For one of us, stability meant flexibility, the freedom to change, move, adapt. For the other, stability meant rootedness, the ability to build something solid, predictable, lasting. Neither was wrong. But they were not the same. This is a moment many immigrants face, not just in relationships but in life. You come to the U.S. thinking you will adjust later. That things will settle eventually. But eventually arrives faster than expected, and choices become unavoidable. English, again, played a quiet role here. We had the vocabulary to explain our positions. We could articulate needs clearly. That clarity did not bring us closer, it revealed distance. Sometimes people believe misunderstandings destroy relationships. In reality, understanding can be just as dangerous. Once you truly understand someone's priorities, you can no longer pretend they will change. Psychologists describe this as cognitive clarity. When ambiguity disappears, emotional denial becomes harder to maintain. That is why breakups often happen after very honest conversations, not arguments. I noticed how my English sounded different when we talked about staying. Slower. Lower. More controlled. My body already knew what my mind was still resisting. I wanted to believe love could bridge everything. That belief is comforting. It is also unrealistic. Love amplifies truth, it does not erase it. This realization did not come with anger. It came with sadness. A quiet sadness that settles in your chest and stays there. Not heavy enough to collapse you. Just heavy enough to change how you breathe. I began asking myself harder questions. Was I asking someone to become a version of themselves they did not want to be? Was I holding on because of love, or because I was afraid of starting over in a foreign country? Fear can disguise itself as commitment very easily. There is research showing that people are more likely to stay in unsatisfying relationships when external uncertainty is high. Immigration, career instability, cultural transition, all increase attachment anxiety. You cling harder when the ground feels unstable. Understanding that did not make the pain disappear, but it gave it context. Context turns suffering into something you can sit with. I practiced English differently again during this period. I focused on naming emotions, not solving problems. I feel sad. I feel unsure. I don't know what will happen. Those sentences are simple, but they are advanced emotionally. They do not demand answers. They acknowledge reality. Slow English helps here. When you speak slowly, you give yourself permission to feel. Fast language hides discomfort. Slow language reveals it. The truth became impossible to ignore. Staying would require one of us to shrink. And love that requires shrinking eventually suffocates. That does not mean the love was wrong. It means the timing was wrong. The direction was wrong. The capacity to stay was different. This is the hardest lesson America taught me, not through rejection, but through clarity. You can meet the right person in the wrong chapter of your life. And that realization prepares you for the most difficult question of all. Not why can't they stay? But can I let go with love instead of resentment? I was not ready to answer that yet. But the question had arrived. And once it arrives, nothing stays the same. Choosing love or letting go. There is a moment when holding on starts to hurt more than letting go. It does not arrive with drama. It arrives with clarity. I remember the day I understood this, not in my head, but in my body. I was listening, but I was no longer hoping. I was speaking, but I was no longer persuading. Something inside me had gone quiet, and that quiet was not peace. It was acceptance knocking softly. The hardest choices in life are not between right and wrong. They are between two kinds of pain. In English, the phrase letting go sounds gentle, almost polite. But in real life, letting go feels like dismantling something you built carefully, piece by piece, while pretending you are fine. You wake up. You go to work. You speak English. You smile. And inside, you are negotiating with yourself every minute. Maybe we just need more time. Maybe things will shift. Maybe love will figure it out. Hope is stubborn. That is not a weakness. It is human. But hope can also delay truth. And truth, once fully seen, does not disappear. The conversation that changed everything did not start as a goodbye. It started as honesty. We spoke slowly. Carefully. English was clear that day, too clear. Each sentence landed exactly where it was meant to. No misunderstanding to hide behind. I care about you. I know. But I can't promise staying. I understand. Understanding is painful when it confirms what you already feel. Psychology calls this emotional convergence, the moment when both people reach the same conclusion independently. It is quiet, mutual, and deeply sad. There is no villain, no betrayal. Just two paths no longer overlapping. I felt something unexpected then, relief. Not happiness. Relief. Relief that I could stop waiting. Relief that I could stop translating uncertainty into hope. Relief that I could finally breathe without holding something together. That relief came with guilt. Loving someone who cannot stay makes you question your worth. You wonder if you were not enough, not flexible enough, not important enough. But that narrative is false. Compatibility is not a reward system. Love is not a test you pass by trying harder. I had to relearn something I already knew intellectually but had not accepted emotionally. People leave not because you failed, but because staying would require them to become someone they are not ready to be. English helped me process this in an unexpected way. When you think in a second language, emotions slow down. They become slightly distant. That distance gave me space to observe my own pain instead of drowning in it. I started journaling in English. Simple sentences. Honest ones. I loved deeply. I am sad. I will be okay. Writing like this is a powerful therapeutic tool. Research shows that expressive writing, even in a second language, reduces emotional intensity and increases cognitive clarity. In simple terms, it helps your brain organize loss. Letting go was not a single decision. It was a series of small permissions. Permission to stop explaining. Permission to stop checking messages. Permission to imagine a future that did not include that person. Each permission hurt. But each one also strengthened something inside me. I noticed how my English changed again. My voice steadied. My sentences became direct. Not cold, just grounded. I was no longer speaking to be chosen. I was speaking to be truthful. There is power in that shift. The final goodbye was not dramatic. No tears in public. No long speeches. Just a shared understanding that this chapter had reached its natural end. That is a rare kind of ending. Painful, but clean. Afterwards, I sat alone and asked myself the question that had followed me since the beginning. Can you love and let go? The answer surprised me. Yes, but not at the same time. You love first. Fully. Honestly. Then, when love has taught you what it needed to teach, you let go. Letting go is not erasing love. It is respecting what was real without forcing it to become something else. That realization did not heal me instantly. But it grounded me. And grounding is the first step toward healing. For English learners watching this moment matters. Because learning a language is also about learning when to stop forcing yourself. When to accept where you are. When to trust that progress does not always look like addition, sometimes it looks like release. I walked away not empty-handed, but changed. My English was stronger. My self-awareness was deeper. My heart was bruised, but open. And that meant the story was not over. It was simply turning a page. After letting go, I had to stay with myself. After you let someone go, the silence does not end. It changes shape. At first, silence feels like absence. Empty space. Missing sounds. Missing routines. Missing a future you had quietly memorized. But then, slowly, silence becomes a mirror. And that mirror is uncomfortable. I had lived in the United States long enough to know how to survive, but not yet how to stay. Staying with yourself is harder than leaving someone else. There is no distraction. No one to negotiate with. No relationship to fix. Just you. I remember coming home after work one evening. The apartment was quiet in a way that felt intentional, not accidental. No tension. No expectation. I cooked dinner slowly. I ate without checking my phone. And that was when it hit me. I had not learned how to live without translating my life around another person. In English, we often say I need space. What we rarely say is, I don't know who I am in that space. Letting go creates a vacuum. And nature, especially human nature, does not like empty space. The instinct is to fill it quickly, with work, with another relationship, with noise. But I resisted that instinct. Not because I was strong. Because I was tired. I was tired of rebuilding myself around someone else's capacity. Tired of adjusting my dreams to fit into conversations that never fully landed. Tired of loving in a way that required shrinking. So I stayed. Staying meant routines. Small ones. Morning walks before work. Listening to English podcasts not to learn, but to feel less alone. Writing again, not about heartbreak, but about observations. The way Americans talk to strangers. The way coffee shops become emotional shelters. The way everyone is busy, and yet quietly lonely. Living in the U.S. teaches you independence fast. But emotional independence is a different skill. No immigration document prepares you for that. There were nights I missed him, not the person exactly, but the version of myself that existed when I believed we were building something permanent. That version felt lighter. More hopeful. More patient. Grief, I learned, is not only about losing someone. It is about losing who you were with them. In therapy, they call this identity recalibration. After a significant emotional bond ends, the brain needs time to reorganize its sense of self. That takes longer than people expect. English helped me name this process. Words like closure never felt accurate. There was no closure, only integration. The past did not need to be sealed. It needed to be understood. I practiced saying this aloud. I loved. I learned. I am still becoming. That sentence grounded me. Slowly, something shifted. I stopped measuring days by how much I missed him. I started measuring days by how present I felt in my own life. How focused I was at work. How calm my body felt when I was alone. There is a quiet confidence that grows when you realize you can sit with your own thoughts without escaping. That confidence does not announce itself. It settles in. My English voice changed again. Not softer. Not harder. Clearer. When you stop performing emotionally, your language follows. You speak with fewer apologies. Fewer justifications. More intention. I noticed it at work. In meetings. In small talk. I no longer filled silence with over-explaining. I trusted that what I said was enough. That trust extended inward. For anyone watching this who is learning English through life stories, this part matters. Because fluency is not only about vocabulary, it is about self-trust. When you trust yourself, you speak more naturally. When you stop chasing approval, your voice stabilizes. Staying with myself did not mean rejecting love. It meant resetting my standards for how love should feel. Love should expand your life, not pause it. Love should support your growth, not compete with it. I began to feel gratitude, not for the pain, but for the clarity it forced. Gratitude for the version of me who chose honesty over comfort. Gratitude for the courage to walk away without bitterness. That gratitude did not erase sadness, but it softened it. One evening, months later, I realized something quietly radical. I was no longer waiting. Not for a message. Not for an apology. Not for time to rewind. I was living forward again. And that is when I knew letting go had done its work. Not by making me forget, but by making me free. The journey was no longer about who stayed or left. It was about who I was becoming next. And that story, that next chapter, was just beginning. Loving again, but not the same way. People think love returns the same way it left. It doesn't. When love comes back after loss, it arrives quietly. No fireworks. No urgency. No dramatic certainty. It comes like a question, not an answer. I wasn't looking for it. That is the first difference. After letting go and learning how to stay with myself, I had become protective of my inner calm. I had built routines that felt stable. Work was steady. My English flowed without effort. My life finally felt like mine. Then one ordinary day, at work, of all places, I noticed something unfamiliar. Not attraction. Not excitement. Safety. We started talking the way adults talk when they're not trying to impress. About schedules. About cultural misunderstandings. About how strange it is to live in a country that teaches independence but rarely teaches emotional honesty. He listened without interrupting. I spoke without over-explaining. That alone felt different. In English, there's a phrase, it feels easy. At first, I didn't trust it. Easy used to feel suspicious. Easy used to mean shallow. But I was older now, emotionally, not just in years. I understood that healthy connection often feels uneventful at the beginning. There was no rush to define anything. No pressure to relive the past. No need to compare stories of pain. We simply shared presence. And presence, I learned, is the real currency of love. This new connection did not awaken old wounds, it respected them. When I spoke about my past, he didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He acknowledged it. That acknowledgement felt like oxygen. I noticed how my body responded. No tight chest. No racing thoughts. No rehearsed conversations in my head. Just calm curiosity. That calm scared me more than chaos ever did. Because calm requires trust. And trust requires vulnerability without drama. I caught myself pulling back, not because of something he did, but because of what I remembered. Trauma does that. It whispers warnings in moments of peace. But this time, I listened differently. I asked myself a new question. Am I protecting myself, or am I hiding? That question changed everything. Love after heartbreak is not about intensity. It's about capacity. How much space you allow someone to occupy without losing yourself. How much truth you speak without fear of abandonment. My English reflected that growth. I spoke plainly. Honestly. I said things like, I need time, and meant it. I said, I'm not sure yet, and didn't apologize. There is power in that kind of language. Living in the U.S. You are taught to move fast, career, relationships, decisions. But healing teaches you something else. Timing matters more than speed. We moved slowly. Intentionally. And in that slowness, something rare happened. I didn't feel like I had to perform. I didn't feel chosen or rejected. I felt met. That is a very different emotional experience. Love was no longer about staying at all costs. It was about choosing each other daily, without fear. I realized something profound. The love I lost taught me how deeply I could feel. The love that followed taught me how safely I could feel. Both were necessary. For English learners watching this phase is important. Because confidence in language mirrors confidence in relationships. When you stop fearing mistakes, emotional or grammatical, you communicate more freely. You don't chase perfection. You aim for clarity. This new love did not erase the old one. It didn't compete with it. It stood on its own foundation. And that foundation was mutual respect, emotional availability, and patience. I was no longer asking, will you stay? I was asking, can we grow together? That question feels lighter. Healthier. One evening, after a long day, we sat in silence. No phones. No expectations. Just quiet companionship. And I thought to myself, this is what I used to think love would be loud. But real love, I learned, often whispers. It says, I'm here. I see you. No rush. That kind of love doesn't consume you. It accompanies you. And that was the biggest lesson of all. Love doesn't have to hurt to be real. It doesn't have to demand sacrifice of self. It can simply fit. The journey that began with loving someone who could not stay had led me here, not to replacement, but to readiness. I was no longer loving from fear. I was loving from wholeness. And that made all the difference. Love, let go, and stay true. If you're still listening right now, it means something inside you recognizes this story. Not because it's dramatic. Not because it's perfect. But because it feels familiar. Most people don't fail at love. They fail at staying honest with themselves while loving. When I look back at my journey, living and working in the United States, learning a new language, adapting to a new culture, loving someone who could not stay, I no longer see mistakes. I see preparation. Every ending trained me for a healthier beginning. That's the part people rarely talk about. In America, there's a strong belief in reinvention. You move cities. You change careers. You start over. But emotionally, starting over is harder than packing boxes. It requires you to let go of identities you built for survival. For a long time, I believed love meant endurance. Staying longer than comfortable. Explaining myself better. Hoping harder. That belief followed me across borders, across accents, across relationships. Until one day, I realized something quietly revolutionary. Love is not proven by how much pain you tolerate. Love is revealed by how much truth you allow. Letting go wasn't an act of defeat. It was an act of self-respect. And here's where language learning and life overlap beautifully. When you learn English, especially at B1 C2 levels, the hardest part isn't vocabulary. It's confidence. It's the courage to speak before you're perfect. To express emotion without having every sentence polished. Love works the same way. You don't wait until you're flawless to be worthy of connection. You show up as you are, with honesty and boundaries. By the time I reached this chapter of my life, my English had softened. Not weaker, clearer. I didn't overfill sentences. I chose words intentionally. I allowed pauses. Those pauses mattered. In relationships, silence is often where truth lives. When you're no longer afraid of it, you stop filling space with fear-driven behavior. I learned that love isn't about staying no matter what. It's about staying aligned. And when alignment disappears, letting go is not abandonment, it's maturity. The question from the title still lingers. Can you love and let go? Yes. But only when love is no longer confused with attachment. Attachment says, I need you to feel whole. Love says, I am whole, and I choose you. That difference changes everything. Living in the U.S. taught me independence. Loving and losing taught me emotional literacy. Language learning tied it all together, because words shape how we think, and how we think shapes how we love. If you're listening to this as English practice, know this, every story you understand trains your ear. Every sentence you repeat trains your confidence. Every emotion you feel while listening makes the language stick. That's why stories work. They don't just teach grammar. They teach courage. This journey didn't end with a perfect romance. It ended with something better, self-trust. And from that place, love becomes lighter. Healthier. Sustainable. I no longer chase certainty. I build clarity. I no longer fear endings. I respect timing. And I no longer ask someone to stay if staying costs me myself. That is the quiet victory. If you're at a crossroads right now, emotionally, linguistically, or geographically, remember this: growth rarely announces itself. It shows up as discomfort, as honesty, as small brave decisions made consistently. Let go when it's time. Love again when you're ready. And never confuse intensity with depth. Because real love doesn't trap you. It teaches you how to stand. And if this story helped you feel seen, even for a moment, then it has already done its job. You are not behind. You are becoming. If this story stayed with you longer than you expected, it's not an accident. Maybe you didn't just practice English today. Maybe you practiced listening to yourself. This channel isn't about perfect grammar or fast-speaking confidence. It's about real English, real emotions, and real life in the United States: love, loss, culture shock, healing, and the quiet courage to begin again. And this is only one chapter. In the next stories, I'll share more true-to-life journeys about living and working in America, learning English through love and heartbreak, marriage, family, and the moments that change us when no one is watching. So if you're learning English at B1, B2, C1, or even C2, and you want stories that feel human, not textbooks, this channel is for you. Subscribe now so you don't miss the next story. Like this video if it made you feel understood. Comment below, can you love and let go? Because the more English you feel, the more naturally you'll speak it. And the next story might sound a lot like your own.